Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to really getting under the skin of complex topics, aiming for those aha
Gonna
moments.
make a real difference.
Exactly. And today, we're taking a pretty profound journey, I think, into the book of Hebrews. It's powerful, sometimes challenging, definitely.
Oh, absolutely. It can be.
But it's incredibly insightful, especially when you're facing those moments of doubt, wondering whether to keep going.
It really is. And, many people do find it difficult at first. A big part of that is because the author just assumes you know your Old Testament inside out, especially the first 5 books, the Torah,
Right. Genesis, Exodus.
Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy,
Yeah.
and particularly Leviticus with all the details about sacrifices. If you don't have that background, well, you might feel a bit lost.
Like you're missing key parts of the conversation.
Precisely. So our mission today is basically to unpack that. Why was Hebrews written? Who was it actually for? And maybe most importantly, how can its, timeless truths give you perspective, especially when things get tough?
And it really is steeped in that Old Testament context. I found this fascinating. Hebrews quotes the Old Testament more than any other book in the New Testament.
That's right. It's saturated with it.
Which tells you straight away how vital that knowledge was for the first people reading it. Now, let me ask you, the listener, directly. Have you ever faced something, maybe a challenge in your life, or even within your own faith, that made you really question things? Made you wonder, should I keep going? Or maybe just give up?
We all face those moments.
Yeah, maybe it's prayers that seem unanswered, or a business setback that feels huge, or maybe disappointment in people, people within a community you trusted.
Or even just personal struggles, finding the discipline to keep going.
Right. That feeling, that temptation to just retreat. That's
Yeah.
exactly what the original audience of Hebrews was dealing with. But honestly, probably amplified like 100 times over.
Their situation was incredibly intense. But the core human response to that kind of pressure, to doubt, it's remarkably consistent, isn't it, across centuries?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this deep dive should hopefully shed light on how the author of Hebrews spoke into those very real feelings, that urge to turn back. And as we go, we'll talk quite a bit about the relationship between the old and the new, often using the word covenant.
Okay, good point. Maybe just a quick definition.
Sure. For anyone unfamiliar, just think of a covenant as a really serious agreement, a solemn promise, often between God and people, laying out terms, expectations, that sort of thing.
Got it. Okay, so let's dive into the context. Who exactly were these original readers?
Well, the letter itself says it's for Hebrews, so we're talking about Jewish Christians.
Jewish people who had come to believe Jesus was the Messiah.
Exactly. And there's a clue in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 3. It says, "Salvation was first announced by the Lord and confirmed to us by those who heard him."
Ah, okay, so confirmed to us by those who heard him.
Yeah.
That suggests they weren't the eyewitnesses themselves.
Precisely. It implies they were likely second-generation believers. They hadn't walked with Jesus personally, but they got the message from the apostles, from those who had been there.
Okay, so they're Jewish Christians, probably second generation. What kind of world were they living in? What were the pressures?
They were caught in this really tough spot, kind of double pressure, you could call it. On one hand, you had growing persecution from the Roman Empire.
Right. Rome wasn't exactly known for its tolerance later on.
Well, initially, Rome was surprisingly tolerant of Judaism. They respected Jewish monotheism, allowed temples, even exempted Jews from things like military service or having to worship the emperor, which was a big deal.
Okay, so Judaism had a sort of protected status.
It did. But Christians, they refused to acknowledge the emperor as divine. That wasn't just a religious disagreement. For Rome, that was political defiance. It basically put them in direct conflict with the state.
So pressure from Rome, that's one side. What was the other?
The pressure came from their own people, their fellow Jews.
How so?
They were being pressured to basically give up on Jesus, to revert back to traditional Judaism.
Why would they do that? What was the appeal?
Well, think about it. If they went back, they'd regain those lost privileges, the legal protection that Judaism offered under Roman law. They'd be part of a recognized sort of legitimate religion again, instead of this new suspect group.
Wow. So deny Jesus and get safety and acceptance back?
Essentially, yes, it was a brutal choice. Compromise your new faith for safety and social standing, or stand firm and face hostility from, pretty much everyone, Rome and their former community.
That is intense pressure. Now, what about the author? You hear different ideas. For a long time, people thought it was the Apostle Paul.
That was the traditional view, yes.
Yeah.
For centuries. But Modern scholarship, looking closely at the writing style,
The Greek is different.
very different. Hebrews is written in this incredibly elegant, complex Greek, quite distinct from Paul's known letters.
Mhm.
Plus, remember that line in chapter 2? The author says he received the message from those who heard Jesus.
Right, whereas Paul often emphasized receiving his revelation directly from Christ.
Exactly. So that makes Paul less likely. There are other suggestions, maybe Barnabas, maybe Apollos, who was known for being eloquent.
But we don't know for sure.
Honestly, no. The academic consensus is that the author is unknown, and you know what? That's okay.
Yeah. Why is that okay?
Because the fact that the early church accepted this book so quickly, valued it so highly, tells you something powerful about the content. The message itself was clearly seen as inspired, authoritative, regardless of who actually penned the words.
The message transcended the messenger.
Beautifully put.
Yes. Okay, so we got the readers, the pressures, the mystery author. There's another piece of context. You mentioned how they read their scriptures. They weren't just using the Hebrew Old Testament.
Mostly not, no. For this audience, the primary text would likely have been the Septuagint, often abbreviated LXX.
Which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament.
Correct. Translated centuries before Christ.
Yeah.
And this isn't just a nerdy detail.
Why does it matter?
Because the Septuagint was their Bible. It's the version they knew, quoted, studied. When the author of Hebrews quotes the Old Testament, which he does constantly, he's usually quoting the Greek Septuagint.
And sometimes the Greek wording might have slightly different nuances than the original Hebrew.
Exactly. Sometimes those subtle differences in the Greek translation actually help the author make his points about Jesus even more powerfully for his Greek-speaking audience. It helps us understand how they were thinking about these texts back then.
Okay, that makes sense. It's like reading Shakespeare in modern English versus the original. You get the gist, but some nuances shift.
A good analogy. And just quickly, the timing. When was this likely written?
Scholars generally place it somewhere between 80, 60, and 70.
And the evidence for that.
Well, a few things. The author refers to the temple sacrifices happening in the present tense. Those stopped abruptly in AD 70 when the Romans destroyed the temple.
Okay, so before AD 70.
Right. There's also a mention of Timothy being released from prison, which helps narrow it down a bit. And Hebrews chapter 12, verse 4 seems to suggest that widespread martyrdom hadn't quite hit this specific community yet.
You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood.
Exactly. Which probably puts it before the really intense Neronian persecution kicked into high gear around AD 64.
Yeah.
So they're riding right on the edge of things getting much, much worse.
The critical moment.
So with all that background, let's get to the heart of it. What's the big goal? What's the author trying to achieve with this letter?
At its absolute core, the purpose is to strengthen the faith of these Jewish Christians, to really encourage them not to turn back to Judaism despite all the persecution, all the temptation, to hold fast to Jesus and keep their eyes on the heavenly goal.
And how does he do that? What's the strategy?
The main strategy is to systematically, relentlessly demonstrate that Jesus is superior to every key element of the old system they were tempted to return to.
Okay, superior. How does he start?
Right off the bat, the very first few verses, Hebrews 1, verses 1 to 3, are like a mini summary of the entire biblical story. It's incredible.
How so?
It starts, God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets.
Okay, that sounds like the Old Testament. Lots of prophets, different methods God used to speak way back then.
Exactly. That's the Old Covenant in a nutshell. Then comes the pivot. Has, in these last days, spoken to us by his Son.
The New Testament, one Son. Now, the final word.
Precisely. Think about that contrast. Various times, various ways, many prophets versus these last days, one Son. What does that shift signal to you, especially to a Jewish reader?
It sounds like the ultimate upgrade, like everything before was leading up to this.
Absolutely. For them, these last days immediately signals the Messianic age has arrived. God's final, complete revelation isn't scattered anymore. It's embodied perfectly in his Son.
And those verses immediately establish who this Son is.
Right. Oh, powerfully. He's called the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. He's the creator holding the universe together, and crucially, the one who provided purification for sins. It establishes his divinity right from the outset.
It sounds a lot like the beginning of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word was God. All things were made through him, and the Word became flesh.
It's a very similar affirmation, isn't it? Both passages drive home Jesus' preexistence, his divine nature. This wasn't just a great prophet. This was God himself entering their story, a foundational truth they needed to grasp, especially if they were tempted to downgrade him.
Okay, so that sets the stage. Jesus is supreme. How does the author build the case from there? You mentioned comparisons.
Yes, the structure of Hebrews is quite logical, actually. The author repeatedly compares Jesus to key figures or institutions from the Old Covenant, and typically, after each comparison showing Jesus' superiority, there's a warning.
A warning, like, don't mess this up.
Sort of, yeah, but maybe more like, given how much better this is, pay attention. Don't drift away. Understand the implications. These aren't just intellectual points. They're urgent calls to respond appropriately to who Jesus is.
Okay, let's walk through them. What's the first comparison?
First up is Jesus versus angels and the law. That's mainly in chapters 1 and 2.
Angels. Why compare Jesus to angels?
Because in Judaism at that time, angels were held in extremely high regard. There was even a belief that angels were mediators in delivering the law to Moses on Mount Sinai. Some strands of Jewish thought almost verged on angel worship. They were seen as powerful intermediaries.
Okay, so they had huge status.
Yeah.
How does Hebrews argue Jesus is superior?
Well, fundamentally, Jesus is the Son, the Creator. Angels are created beings, servants, messengers, ministering spirits, the text calls them. Jesus has an inherited name far superior to theirs. He's the one the angels worship.
So creator versus created. Got it.
But then comes this amazing paradox. Though he is infinitely superior, Jesus voluntarily became a little lower than the angels for a time.
By becoming human.
Exactly. By taking on human flesh, suffering, and dying. He did this precisely to accomplish salvation, tasting death for everyone. His temporary lowering led to ultimate glory and fulfilled God's saving plan.
Wow. Okay, so he's superior, yet he humbled himself below them for our sake. What's the warning attached to this comparison?
It comes right after establishing his superiority in his work. Hebrews 2, verses 1 to 3. We must pay more careful attention, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. How shall we escape if we ignore so great a salvation?
So the logic is, if the law delivered by angels was important and had consequences for disobedience,
How much more serious is it to ignore the message of salvation brought directly by the Son himself? Drifting from the gospel delivered by Jesus is far more perilous than neglecting the law delivered by angels. It's about not letting this ultimate truth just slip away.
okay, that's clear. What's the next comparison?
Next, in chapters 3 and 4, we have Jesus versus Moses and the Promised Land.
Moses. Now, he's a huge figure, probably the central human figure in the Old Testament for Jewish people. Leader, lawgiver.
Absolutely revered, led Israel out of Egypt, received the law, oversaw the building of the tabernacle. You can't overstate his importance.
So how can Jesus be shown as superior to Moses?
The author uses this really effective analogy. He says Moses was faithful as a servant in God's house, referring to Israel, the tabernacle, but Jesus is faithful as a son over God's house.
Servant in the house versus son over the house.
Okay. And who built the house in the first place?
Yeah.
Jesus, the Son who created all things. So Moses served within a structure. Jesus is the architect and owner of the entire structure.
That's a powerful distinction. And what about the Promised Land part?
Well, think about Moses. For all his greatness, what happened at the end of his life?
He didn't get to enter the Promised Land.
His disobedience.
Exactly. He saw it from afar but didn't enter. The author uses this as a launching point. That generation failed to enter God's rest, the earthly Promised Land, because of unbelief and disobedience.
So what's the connection to Jesus? Jesus offers entry into a better rest. Not just a piece of land, but the ultimate heavenly rest with God. The final Sabbath rest, think the new heaven and new earth.
And the warning then follows that pattern.
Yes, just as the Israelites' disobedience and unbelief kept them out of the earthly rest, the warning is, don't let unbelief keep you out of God's ultimate heavenly rest offered through Jesus. We're urged to be diligent to enter that rest.
Don't repeat the same mistake of unbelief. Makes sense. What's comparison number 3?
This is a big one. Jesus versus the Levitical priests, and it introduces the figure of Melchizedek. This covers chapters 5 through 7.
Okay, the Levitical priests, descendants of Aaron, Moses' brother, they are the ones who performed all the sacrifices in the tabernacle and later the temple. Absolutely central to the whole system.
Totally central. Day in, day out, offering animal sacrifices to atone for the people's sins. But the author points out their limitations. They were human, they were sinful themselves.
Right, they had to offer sacrifices for their own sins first.
Exactly. And crucially, the sacrifices they offered had to be repeated over and over, daily, yearly on the Day of Atonement. They only covered sin temporarily. They couldn't perfect the worshiper.
So how is Jesus superior as a priest?
First, he's perfect, sinless. He doesn't need to offer sacrifices for himself. Second, he's not from the tribe of Levi. He's appointed by God as a priest in the order of Melchizedek.
Melchizedek, he's that mysterious figure from Genesis, right? King and priest who met Abraham.
That's the one. He pops up briefly in Genesis 14 and Psalm 110. He predates Levi and Aaron. By linking Jesus to Melchizedek, the author shows Jesus' priesthood is of a different, older, and superior order. It's an eternal priesthood.
Eternal, unlike the Levitical priests who died and were replaced.
Precisely. And the most critical difference, the sacrifice. The Levitical priests offered animals repeatedly. Jesus offered himself once for all time.
One sacrifice, his own life, completely effective forever.
That's the core argument. His single sacrifice actually achieves what the endless animal sacrifices never could, true forgiveness and cleansing.
So this directly answers a practical question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, why don't Christians offer animal sacrifices today or follow all the old priestly rituals?
Exactly. Because Jesus fulfilled all of that. He is the perfect high priest and the perfect sacrifice. The system is obsolete because the reality it pointed to has arrived. We now have direct access to God through him. The Holy Spirit dwells within believers. The intermediaries are no longer needed in the same way.
And the warning here.
If you turn away from Jesus, you're rejecting the only truly effective high priest, the only sacrifice that actually deals with sin permanently. You're turning back to a system that, while God-given for its time, was always meant to point forward to something better. Rejecting Jesus means rejecting true reconciliation with God.
Wow. Okay. One more comparison.
Yes. The fourth major one in chapters 8 through 10 is Jesus versus the Old Covenant sacrifices and the Old Covenant itself, contrasted with the New Covenant he inaugurates.
So moving from the priests to the actual sacrifices and the agreement they were part of.
Right. The Old Covenant, mediated by Moses and centered around the law and the sacrificial system, relied on those continuous sacrifices you mentioned, that pile of sheep, as one might say. They provided temporary atonement, but couldn't change the human heart.
They were like putting a bandage on a deep wound, maybe? Covered it, but didn't heal it?
That's a good way to put it. They dealt with the outward act, but couldn't bring about inner transformation. The author argues Jesus' sacrifice does something radically different.
How so?
His sacrifice isn't just temporary or external. It's a one-time, perfect, permanent act. His blood doesn't just cover sin. The author says it cleanses our consciences from dead works so we can serve the living God. It makes true heart holiness possible.
So it works from the inside out.
Exactly. And by doing this, Jesus establishes a new covenant, one that Jeremiah prophesied about centuries earlier, where God says, "I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts." It's a relationship based on grace, forgiveness, and internal transformation, not just external rule following.
So it's not just a revised version. It's a fundamentally different kind of relationship with God.
Completely. It's superior because it achieves what the Old Covenant could only foreshadow. It brings people into genuine, intimate relationship with God.
And the warning then is about rejecting this new covenant.
Yes. If you deliberately turn away from Jesus after understanding this, after recognizing his sacrifice is the ultimate, final, perfect one, there's no other sacrifice left for sins. You're rejecting God's final and complete provision for redemption. It's a very sobering warning about the seriousness of rejecting the truth once you've received it.
Okay, so after laying out this incredibly detailed case for Jesus' superiority over angels, Moses, the priesthood, the sacrifices, the entire Old Covenant, where does the author take the readers then?
He shifts gears a bit. Having established why they should hold on to Jesus, he moves into how. Chapters 11 through 13 become this powerful call to faith and perseverance.
This is where the famous Hall of Faith comes in, right? Hebrews 11.
Exactly. Chapter 11 starts with that classic definition. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see.
Confidence and assurance, even when you can't see the outcome.
Right. And then he lists this incredible roll call of Old Testament figures: Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Moses, Rahab, Gideon, David, Samuel, the prophets. All these heroes of faith.
What's the point he's making by listing them all?
He's showing the readers they belong to a long lineage of people who lived by faith, who trusted God's promises even when things were incredibly difficult, even when they didn't see the full picture.
But here's something crucial, isn't it? A lot of those people listed, they didn't exactly have easy lives. Many suffered greatly.
That's a key insight. The author is brutally honest. He mentions those who were tortured, faced jeers and flogging, chains and imprisonment, stoned, sawn in two, killed by the sword. They wandered destitute, persecuted, mistreated.
And the text explicitly says many of them died without receiving the things promised in their lifetime.
Precisely. They saw the promises from a distance. They welcomed them. They acknowledged they were foreigners and strangers on earth, looking for a better country, a heavenly one. They believed anyway. They endured.
That's quite a perspective shift. It's not have faith and everything will be easy.
Not at all. It's have faith because God is faithful even when everything looks bleak, even when you don't see the fulfillment right now. It's about endurance rooted in trust.
So let's bring this right back to you, the listener. After hearing all this, the supremacy of Jesus, this history of enduring faith, what does it mean for your struggles? Those challenges we talked about earlier.
Well, the core message, the deep dive takeaway perhaps, is this. Faith in Jesus does not guarantee a life free from suffering, disappointment, or persecution. Hebrews is incredibly realistic about that.
It doesn't promise an easy ride?
No, but here's the crucial part, maybe the really interesting bit. It teaches that even in suffering, God hasn't abandoned you. Your life is in His hands. Even if the worst happens, even if you lose your earthly life, your ultimate hope is secure, eternal salvation, the new heaven and new earth.
So that perspective changes everything, doesn't it? Those challenges, the unanswered prayer, the frustration with others, your own struggles with discipline or motivation, they aren't necessarily signs that you should give up.
Exactly. They're not exit ramps off the path of faith. Instead, Hebrews reframes them as opportunities. Opportunities to deepen your trust, to rely more fully on God's strength, to experience His presence in the midst of the storm. It's a chance for your faith muscle to actually get stronger.
It fundamentally shifts how you view difficulty. It's not a reason to bail, but maybe a reason to lean in.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Lean into God. And the book concludes with some really practical encouragement, too.
Like,
Keep digging into Scripture, especially the Old Testament, but always read it through the lens of Jesus, seeing how it all points to Him. Don't let those stern warnings paralyze you with fear.
understand them as loving guidance.
Exactly. Understand them as God, showing the real consequences of choices, inviting you into a relationship based on trust and understanding, not just fear. Recognizing Jesus as the only way, the only truth, the only source of eternal life. The warnings are like guardrails on the path to life.
So to kind of wrap this up, the book of Hebrews is just this extraordinary piece of writing. It's almost like a condensed version of the whole Bible story.
Yeah, showing how perfectly the Old and New Testaments connect.
Lawlessly connecting them, yeah. And it all relentlessly points to the supremacy, the centrality, the utter sufficiency of Jesus Christ.
It was clearly a lifeline for that original community facing immense pressure. And its message just resonates so powerfully today, doesn't it? Offering real answers to those deep questions about faith, doubt, and how to keep going.
It shows how every single aspect of that old system, the law, the priests, the sacrifices, found its complete fulfillment in Jesus. He brings a better hope, a better covenant. He is the perfect high priest who did everything needed for us to be reconciled to God.
Nothing more needs to be added.
Right. So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. As you navigate your own challenges, your own questions, what does this deep dive into Hebrews mean for you? Is there some ancient wisdom here waiting to reshape how you see your present struggles? Could it encourage you not just to, grit your teeth and endure, but to actually persevere with a genuine, unwavering hope?
Knowing that in Jesus, you truly have everything you need.
Exactly. Something to reflect on. Maybe think about how these insights apply to your own journey, especially when you hit those crossroads, the choice to give up or the choice to press on in faith.